Hello there, and welcome to Montessori 101, a live show from Child of the Redwoods, all about the magic of Montessori. We believe that every child deserves a Montessori education. I'm Aubrey Hargis.
And I'm David Hargis. So whether you are live or you're watching the replay or maybe that podcast version, doesn't matter. We're just happy to have you with us.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to know more about our work, head over to our website, childoftheredwoods.com.
Yes. All right. Well, today we are here to talk more about reading. We've done actually several episodes so far specifically about reading. So
it's a really popular topic.
Definitely go back and search for that if that is something that you're interested in.
Yeah, movable alphabet, sandpaper letters. Gosh, there's so many reading lives.
We should make a playlist.
Playlist.
Yeah, we will do that. Okay. All right. Well, if you're here live, feel free to come in and just chat with us, ask any questions that you have about teaching reading or anything that we're talking about. We're here for you. We are here today to talk about the power of pre-reading. So not teaching your child to read specifically, but actually something that is super critical that needs to happen before you teach your child the relationship between the sounds and the letters. So hold off on that sandpaper letter set and the movable alphabet. We can talk more about that later. Today, we won't be talking about that part of teaching reading at all. But Maria Montessori actually wove into the Montessori classroom in the same way that she conceived as the Montessori classroom activities being experiments. She wove in all of these amazing little pre-reading activities that now, knowing a whole lot more about the way the brain works, we can look back at her original method and say, like, wow, she just observed that children needed these things. And actually, we can back it up with modern neuroscience now and say, actually, now we can see that this is having a direct effect on the way children are perceiving their world and developing their skills.
Yeah, I'm curious. I hadn't thought about this before. I wonder, tell me if I get it wrong, but I don't think Maria, as I remember, she didn't intend for the children to learn writing. She wasn't intentionally teaching writing. And so it's one of the things that makes Maria such a famous figure in her time and legacy is that the children she was working at the Casa dei Bambini suddenly seemed to acquire the ability to write and had a mania for writing.
Yes.
And there's a lot of beautiful stories in her own biographies and research and journals and lectures about this experience. So she didn't have the vision of teaching writing in mind, but she was very, very closely watching what the children were drawn to, what they had sensitivity toward. And it seems like by populating her classroom with those kinds of materials, she was
unintentionally teaching reading.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now we can look back and say, oh, it seems so clever, but that's because this is like good science. She's a good scientist, right?
Yeah.
She followed the child and she really studied them. She, encouraged or empowered what she was seeing them do and stripping away her own preconceptions. And the end result was this like near miraculous ability to write emerged. So
yeah, she was stunned herself.
Yeah.
She did not in any way expect to be teaching these little children how to read.
That's right. So I knew it was a surprise to her. And I think in my mind, I've always thought, well, the magic of childhood, the secret of childhood. But I think there's something interesting here because we're going to talk about this pre-reading activity. And I was thinking, when we think about teaching reading, what do we think? We think about phonetic sounds, pre-reading books or early readers, Dr. Seuss, something like that, right? But actually the reading process and the Montessori approach starts well before that with object-to-object matching and all sorts of things that are in this pre-reading category we're going to talk about today that she was doing in the classroom without knowing that I'm getting the sense that maybe she didn't realize these were pre-reading activities.
Right.
She just knew that the kids were drawn to it. And by encouraging that, she was inadvertently, in a sense, supporting this greater skill. And that was an aha moment. Must have been like a eureka thing.
I think for Maria Montessori, it was a lot like, well, this comes off sounding really bad, but she's essentially doing like experiments on the kids, right?
Yes. I mean, she's a scientist.
She was a scientist. So she literally was sitting in there thinking, I wonder what would happen if, and then she would just drop a new material into the class. And sometimes she wouldn't even be there to introduce it to the children. In fact, most times she wasn't. She would just kind of like create something, and then she would just show it to the teacher's aide, who was actually the teacher in the classroom. Maria was sitting there observing most of the time and just interacting. She would tell the teacher like, or just show the children, how to use it or what to do. And then she would observe the teacher and to see what the teacher did.
Yeah.
And I find this so interesting too, because later on when she created her teaching training centers, she was very specific about like how to introduce an activity.
Yes.
But we might wonder, like, how did she come to those conclusions herself?
She used the scientific method.
And she gave very little instruction to the teachers at all. In fact, she said, oh, just, here's a new material for you to show the children. And the teacher would be like, well, what does it do? And, what am I supposed to do with it? And Marie would say, well, just, show it to them.
Yeah. That's how good product design, you go through beta testing and stuff. That's kind of how it works when you kind of want to put stuff, when in my former life, when I worked in product development, that was one of the most exciting things about doing product development, because we would have, we would spend maybe years conceiving of something and building it. And you'd spend countless hours on the technical side and the design and all, the logic behind it. It was just complex. Then you put it into people's hands and see what they did, and they would immediately do something unexpected. And that was always the most exciting, because if you design something well, then whatever they came up with was healthy, even if it wasn't what you imagined. And I get the sense that that's sort of what Maria was doing too, in a sense, like that's a sort of scientific way. She was saying like these materials, like a pink tower or the sandpaper letters or whatever she was introducing, bringing them to bear, and said, I have an idea based on what the children are up to of what this should help with, but how it really works out, well, we're going to find out. And I'm not going to tell you up front what my outcome is. I want to see if the materials themselves lend themselves to this outcome. So we'll see. And then
our printer just went off.
It's all right.
Is somebody upstairs doing? No, they can't hear it.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, so she would. I'm thinking, okay, so she would do this with the teachers, but she also did it with the children with random materials.
Yep.
And some of those materials, Maria Montessori did not create. Oh, it's math. Okay, have a good class. Sorry, 13-year-old dropped in to, I guess, print his math homework, which is awesome. Homeschooling in action. So she actually did not create like the sandpaper letters per se, or the movable alphabet herself.
No.
She took ideas from,
yes.
And, another instance, she kind of just dropped them in the classroom and played with them and then improved upon them.
Well, she had an idea though,
observed.
Right? I mean, based on the research of others that had gone before that had created these things.
Right.
And so she was innovating on that.
Right.
Well, anyway, the long story short is that she discovered, and now we know for sure, that there are all kinds of things, neurological and biological, physical changes and so forth, sensorial experiences that a child will go through in learning to read.
Yes.
And we collectively call these pre-reading. And I think still in the public imagination, we think of learning to read as learning the alphabet song or reading a little book or being read to. And those are definitely part of reading, but the process of learning to read starts much earlier and in ways that are maybe surprising if you aren't aware of the Montessori method or reading techniques.
Okay, so you might have to turn that printer off.
Okay.
I know they can't hear it, but I can. All right. So today's topic is pre-reading. And one of the questions I wanted to pose is that in Montessori, we actually kind of have a reputation. I know, getting math homework. We have a reputation for teaching reading early. Okay. Yeah. And it is a well-deserved reputation because in some other methods of education, reading isn't taught until much later.
Totally.
And this used to be the case in traditional public schooling here in the United States, right?
That's right. Well, even when I went to school, I think I learned the alphabet in kindergarten, but I didn't really learn reading until first grade, I think.
Right.
That was in the 80s.
Right.
So
reading historically has been delayed, but that is actually not happening anymore.
Yes.
So in recent years, I'm not really sure exactly when it started happening. I know it was already happening when I started teaching kindergarten, and that was in the year 2000.
I think it's an outgrowth of the 90s, Bush as governor, origin of NCLB, and the rise of testing and the focus on reading.
So what we've been doing in our traditional public schools is we've been starting to teach reading earlier and earlier and earlier and earlier. And as Montessorians, we might be thinking that's great. Like that's what we've been doing all along. Teaching reading in preschool is awesome. And, but the problem is when you start to demand that children learn to read at a certain level before a certain age. And then we kind of get in trouble developmentally. And I just want to be really clear that even though we do encourage parents to teach their children to read in the preschool years, we are not making it like the core part of the educational process. It is actually, we tell our parents to delay it until their children are a little bit older, so don't feel like you need to start teaching reading at age 2 or even age 3. It's okay to wait until age 4 or 5. Even for some children, even it's okay to
now that is easier said than done. There is a lot of social pressure. Where do you think that comes from? What do you think it is? Why do you think we have such a social pressure now to learn to read, to rush into reading?
Well, as you said, the testing does have a big part of it. But I think we have this idea that a person who is very well read is like a very educated, intelligent person, and a person that is not very well read. And this is a very old stereotype, right? Like
sure.
We think of someone who can't read as someone who's real dumb, right?
Yeah, book smart. Right.
Someone who's book smart is well educated. And I think as parents, we all want our children to do well. We have their best interest at heart when we do teach them how to read. And in fact, we know that whereas, being a good reader or not may really have nothing to do with how intelligent a person is or like how well their brain functions or how successful they literally could be out in the world as a person. We do know that it is greatly dependent on how well they will do in school later on. So if you just think of our whole school system, it really is set up for good readers. Where most of the work that we would have we anticipate our children doing in school, we're thinking they're going to read a book and then they're going to analyze it. They're going to read a text and then they're going to talk about it. They're going to read this literature and then they're going to write the essay about it, or they're going to research and then we think like this is our goal. Is to
even in the
children,
Montessori
right?
lower L, starting in lower L, that is a lot of it.
It's
about reading and research.
Yeah. So I feel like we really can't be blamed. You have to go turn the printer off because I can't talk and listen to the. Sorry, friends. I know. I want to be my best for you. Yeah, just unplug that sucker. He's already in class. I don't know what's being printed. Okay. So I think that as parents, we know that reading is important. We don't want our children to succeed. We think of our children's future and we think, you know what? The children who are the most successful are the kids that do well in school. They get A's. They are able to do well on those SATs or whatever they are these days. And then they get into a good college, and then they get a great degree, and then they go out in the workforce, or maybe they go to grad school. I don't know. But we think of like a really intelligent person has a PhD or some kind of doctoral degree, right? And like the less degrees you have, and the less education you have, and the less good at reading and research you are, the less smart you are in society. And even like we grew up in a culture that really celebrated that as the pinnacle. Of higher education is better. The more education you have, the better. The higher your degree is, the better. RJ, is this resonating with you? Oh, she says, I just heard this from my daughter's doctor at her 6-year-old checkup today. Woo! Yes. Okay. So as Montessorians, we have this push and pull feeling, right? We know that our children are operating in this world, whether it's just or unjust for good, fluent readers or not. Okay. We also know that within every single child is a very wonderful and magical and important intelligence, and that intelligence can be shown in many different ways other than just the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. That being a smarter person does not actually equate to earlier reading skills or better reading skills long term. But we're working in a society that does still value those things. And so naturally, we want our children to learn how to read. But David and I are here, and maybe we've done too much talking about this earlier part. You guys let us know. But what is really, really important is that we understand that the whole brain, even if we have this goal of like, ultimately, we just want our children to be able to read a book and to be successful at it. There's so much more that a child's brain is learning and developing. And there's so many important skills. And many of those skills do lead to being a stronger or more fluent reader. And as a culture, we tend to devalue those things, and we prioritize like the book smart side of intelligence all the way up, I think. And so often in our courses, especially like our primary course, where we're working with children who are 2 years old to 6 years old, parents of those children, often we have to tell those parents to not teach their child how to read yet, because children are learning so many more other important skills that need to have time to develop before we put that emphasis on learning the sound letter relationship. Right. So, I mean, everybody wants to prioritize that and get to the point where kids are like reading, and we know it will open up a whole new world for them, and it will be wonderful and magical. But all of these, you can look it up, like these pre-reading activities that we can do. We can lump it under this word called phonological awareness activities. I just gave a big lecture about this in our primary program. They are crucial. They're really, really, really important. So don't feel like you're in a rush. In fact, what the research says about reading, even though we offer children letters early, and even though Marie Montessori discovered scientifically, like, oh, wow, like it can amazingly
can learn to read.
Like little kids can learn to read, even though we know that is something special about the way we teach reading in Montessori. We have to work against this idea that we have to rush our children into it, because there is no correlation between learning how to read early and being a strong reader later on. Learning to read is a process that is taught. There is no sensitive period for it. Contrary to a Montessori popular belief about sensitive periods for everything, there's no scientific research that says that there is a sensitive period for learning to read. What we do know is that when children are very young, like younger than 12, that their brains are more flexible and more adaptable, and they learn everything faster than we do later.
Just it comes easier because everything comes
just
easier.
Like they heal faster. Like their skin knits itself, those scratches knit together faster, and their brains absorb more things faster, and they process things in a different way than we do as adults. So I would say, like, if your child is under the age of 12, like your 10-year-old can learn to read just as efficiently as your, 4-year-old. And when, given that your 10-year-old has had a lot of practice reading, like by the time they get to be like 18 years old or beyond, when they go back and they do studies and say, oh, how early did you learn to read? And how early did you learn to read? They notice that there is no distinguishing factor between the two groups.
Mhm.
And that stunned me. As a Montessorian, I was shocked, and I didn't believe that fact for a long, long time. It is actually something that homeschoolers comfort each other with. When you have a child who's not yet reading yet, your child's 6 and they haven't quite got it yet. Another homeschooler is always there to say, you know what? I know kids that learned to read when they were much, much, much older. Now, I'm not recommending that we don't expose our children to reading skills until they're much, much older.
No, we're not advocating delaying reading or literary
you will hear
exposure.
that in a Waldorf
that is
context,
not our
and that's not a Montessori perspective. But it might give you some comfort to know that your child is learning a wealth of things. And even if your child is delayed in reading or not super interested in it yet, there are so many things that you can do to give them strong reading skills that will add to their ability to be fluent, strong readers in the future when they are ready. And you can do that right now. So there's lots of things in the Montessori method that do this.
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and bury the lead, because what we're doing and what we wanted to talk about specifically is something that I think is amazing. I'm going to show you a reading lesson, and you're going to look at it and you're going to say, that's not a reading lesson. But that's the whole point. Yes. Are you ready?
Okay.
Are you ready?
All right. This comes from our mushroom unit.
Comes from mushroom, which is the current constellation theme. Okay. Did you see that? Now, there were words on here. The word is conical. Yep. But let's grab some other pages. You're probably thinking, oh, well, somewhere else in there.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's more reading lessons. This one says campanulate. It's the shape of the mushroom. Mm-hmm. This one says ovate. So there are, I think, 7 to 10 different shapes. Mm-hmm. So those are the only words. How could this be a reading lesson? Tell me, Montessori expert, why is this, which has one very complicated word, a reading lesson? Okay,
it's a reading lesson because it teaches children. It is focused on something that is very, very important for learning how to read, and that is visual discrimination. In fact, it's good for children to be doing activities like this, even if they are already reading, because it will strengthen those reading skills. So visual discrimination, it means literally being able to tell the difference between shapes or between objects. So I'm going to give another example here. Okay. All right. So here I have in my hand, what is this? Not the tea inside.
Oh, I think it's a mug or a cup.
Which is it? A mug or a cup?
I'm going to say mug.
How can you tell?
Well, I think I'm going to say cup because it gets smaller at the bottom. And a mug is more cylindrical.
Okay. Could be. I don't know. I call anything with a handle like a mug. And I think I call anything with without a handle maybe a cup.
Oh.
I don't know. But
I wonder if that's a regionalism too.
But maybe a mug is a kind of cup.
Well, we say have a cup of tea.
We do. And that definitely has like a teacup. You're right. Okay. A teacup has a candle and it is not a mug. I think of a mug as something being bigger and thicker than a teacup. A little teacup would be small and delicate and fragile. But even though I have my tea in this, I think of it as a mug because it's larger and more durable.
Okay.
All right. So how could we have this conversation about mugs and cups like that? It's because we've spent most of our life using the word mug or cup, interchangeably in different contexts.
That's right.
We've looked, and probably been in different environmental situations where we've ordered a mug of, you might have a mug of hot chocolate I don't know, maybe have a cup of hot chocolate too. Anyway, language
You can have a cup of soup.
Language can
It
have,
comes in a bowl.
You could. That comes in a bowl. Here we are getting more and more complicated. But the point is that your child is naturally in a world where they are trying to associate a word with a certain object and to make that distinction between them.
Yeah, they're looking at the various qualities of this shape.
Right.
And then associating that with a concept.
Yes. Yes. So they're looking at this and they're learning the colors. They might be classifying it by the colors. This is blue and some green in it and some brown. They are looking at the shapes of things and learning to associate them with a word, or even just to distinguish the tiny little differences between them. So if I had two mugs here, one that was more of a cylindrical shape and one with maybe this curve at the bottom, maybe I have two that have cylinder shapes, and one, they would be
look at this,
picking out the tiny difference. This is totally different from,
but it's also a cup. And here's why I'm pointing that out. Because if you do an activity like this, this is just one example. The variation that we're providing here is, you see the shape of the standard, but then you have variation in size and color, but they're all the same type of mushroom. And so what we're training the child is to look for, even within variation. And that variation can sometimes be great.
All right. So it can be very different. Right?
But the qualities at the end of the day are the same. It pulls liquid. It does whatever. People drink out of it. Well, however we define it. In the same way that the shape that we would call the letter A, even if it's cursive or block or written in sand, or it's yellow, or it's great big, or it's block or whatever, it's still the symbol we call A. And you're starting to teach the child to recognize visually, to discriminate between that formation and the formation of something that we might call the letter B. Even though a letter B and a letter A, in some sense, can look really similar. You can have all funny kinds of ways to write letters that are really creative. And boy, it gets really confusing. But as adults who are proficient in reading, we don't get confused. Part of it is that we can sound out the words, or we can see the other letters around it, and we can put the word together. But that's visual discrimination as well. And that comes from years and years and years of practice. And so when your child is doing an activity like identifying the qualities of a shape, like say in geometry, this is a related activity, right? Geometry in the primary years would go with this pre-reading skill, right? As they're working through those discerning of shape qualities, they're actually training their eye and their brain to see the subtle differences. And this becomes critical in helping them process the letters. And this comes before they learn that this thing that we call an A goes ah, or a, or ah, right? It makes these different sounds. And this is long before you get to there. You're just knowing that I can visually discern or pick out a thing that is a letter. And that letter has a certain set of qualities that makes it distinct, even if it's very similar to other letters. So like a C and an E can be very similar, right?
Honestly, it is, those of us who do know how to read in English and are familiar with the letters, we just do it automatically anymore. Because we don't even think about it.
We remembered it.
But actually, the skill that we're trying to teach children with learning how to read is very hard. If you think about an O is all filled, but a C is like an O that's partially filled.
That's right.
And an A is like an O with a little line on it.
And an E is an O that kind of cuts in.
Kind of curves in. And so to the child, your very young child, they all look the same at first.
Totally.
Just like if you're an untrained botanist, maybe you, or like a regular person, like you go out, I go out into the nature, and maybe I can distinguish. I have trained my eyes pretty well to find the redwood trees, because that is such a special tree around here, and they are very unique in shape, and their fronds are very unique. But I think, and also there are redwood trees, so like the bark is a little bit more reddish. But if you came here from, I don't know, somewhere else in the world, and you knew that redwood things were trees were like a thing here on the West Coast and around San Francisco Bay Area or California in general, and you started looking around trying to find the redwoods, you would find some redwood trees that matches your mental description of what a redwood tree is probably like. And you're probably thinking it's a shape, it's like a triangle with, and it would have red bark. And so you'd be looking, which trees have red bark? And we did this when we moved here too. And there are some trees that look just like that. But there's some redwood trees that seem to look nothing like it. Like their bark is a little more gnarly, or it's a little bit darker, or the fronds, are different, during different times of year, even when they've got new growth or not. Or just the shape of the tree is not what you would think of as a redwood, or maybe it's not very tall. And so as a regular non-botanist person going out into the woods, that became something that was interesting for us, was finding the redwood trees and distinguishing them between a redwood tree and say like a Douglas fir.
Yep.
Right. And at first, a Douglas fir does not have red bark. But if you're just like in the middle of the forest and you're looking up and there's evergreen trees all around you, and you know that redwood trees are here, and you are an untrained eye, it's actually more difficult than you would think to locate which ones are the redwoods versus other evergreens. And so now that we've lived here and we're more familiar with the trees that are growing here, I can start to look at them and I'm like, ooh, California bay laurel, redwood, Douglas fir, Monterey cypress. But like I've got a list of local trees that I have trained my eyes to notice the shapes of and the distinctions between. But I can't do it with every single tree.
But your analogy is good. So as adults, there are probably things in your own environment that you've trained yourself to identify the distinction between.
That would be completely foreign to somebody not local to your
area.
Area.
And that's the process that your child is going through as they're learning to read. They're going through this discrimination process. Now, Aubrey said before that there's not a sensitive period for reading, but a child can learn faster. And so it's harder generally for someone my age to learn the difference between cow parsnip, hemlock, and Queen Anne's lace, right? They all look the same. One killed Socrates. One is.
Why is that hard? Is that hard for you?
It is. They all kind of look the same to me.
You also never identify poison oak or poison ivy
exactly.
correctly. And that just blows my mind. Like,
nope.
That is such an important plant to be able to recognize out in the wild. And yet, like time and time again, I'm like, you just walked through a bunch of poison oak. And he's like, oh, okay.
Oh, well. And yet here I am. What can I say? So I'm not even itchy, guys. But so we go through this process, but for the child, it's much, much easier, right? So they don't have necessarily the sensitive period for learning to read, but their brains are such absorbent sponges when they're younger. It becomes much easier for them to take in that information and grow those those pathways. Okay. And that's why learning to read at a younger age is really great, because you can take advantage of that superpower that a child has.
So let's do an example. I just cut out a few of these mushroom cards. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're teaching, and there are many more, but I'm just going to work with just two right now. So we're teaching in our mushroom unit, we're actually teaching the shape of the mushroom's cap. So mushroom caps actually come in like 6 or 7 different distinct shapes that we can classify, that have been classified by, what's a mushroomologist? I don't know.
Myconologist or somything?
Myconologist, mycologist.
Mycologist? A Mike and Ike mycologist?
I think it's mycologist. Anyway, a mycologist would take a look at these and would be able to classify the mushrooms by their caps. Yes. And other features as well. Caps is just one of
color,
the features.
Maybe odor.
Well, and also
size,
like
fins. Yeah.
Gills. No, I don't think they have fins.
What about the shark mushroom? I'm pretty sure it has fins.
All right. So anyway, here are 2 of the cap shapes. I've got an ovate cap shape, which Montessorians, I think, will appreciate because what does this remind you of?
An oval?
An oval. Yes.
An egg?
And why?
Ova? Egg?
And why is an oval or an ovoid important in Montessori?
It's one of the geometric shapes and solids?
Yes. Yes, it
Oh.
is. It's one of the geometric solids. It's an ovoid and also an ovoid. And also in our geometric cabinet, we've also got ovals.
Yes.
In our metal insets,
Yes.
we have our children draw, like trace around the ovals. And anyway, it's geometrically cool, right? Alina says, well, I've learned a lot here by Googling all of these. Awesome.
Yes.
I know. So then we also have this one called, so there's the ovate shape. And that's something fun to talk about with the kids, why it's called ovate. And if you have the Montessori materials, you would hopefully get them out and relate them.
Yep.
But this one is called campanulate shape. All right.
Not in the geometric.
It is not,
geometry cabinet.
But if I were with a child, like I actually might be going over and looking in our geometric cabinet or the metal insets. I would be taking a look at the shape and asking my child, like, what does this remind you? And it probably reminds them of like a quatrefoil.
Yes.
That's what I would guess. But here we would learn how to pronounce it together. Campanulate. All right. And then what we do, we may actually made this work extra hard because in Montessori, for our youngest children, one of the distinguishing factors of Montessori materials is the consistency in color and isolating everything down to just the one quality. And that is actually the opposite of what we did here for this lesson. So it was kind of fun to break the Montessori rules of, materials making. So for example, we've got our pink tower. Mm-hmm. All of the blocks are pink because we're isolating the quality of size, right? Mm-hmm. And if they were each a different color, the child might have to think about color and size at the same time.
Or they might remember how to order them based on memorizing the colors.
Yes, exactly.
And that's not what we want.
Right. So, so that's why, for those of you who are wondering, many Montessori materials are all very consistently colored, the same color, as opposed to maybe the colorful nature of a lot of other toys and educational materials out there that just do mix them up. But in this activity, we actually decided to mix them up on purpose to be mischievous and fun and sneaky and to offer something a little more complicated for those children who are ready to go beyond just the one quality. And so here, if you want to hold these two up, campanulates and ovates.
Okay.
So fun. That's okay, Alina. Oops. Oh, can you hold that up?
Yeah.
Lessons for adults today. Exactly. Oh, thank you.
All lessons are for adults and children alike.
They sure are. I didn't know anything about these mushroom cap shapes until I started researching for our
mushroom. Not me. I knew everything.
Oh, right. Right.
Let's see those.
Okay.
Pens.
So.
So go ahead. Sorry.
So, what we would be doing? Is we have a whole bunch of these little cards, and I just want to show the array of them. Okay, so we have them there's like different colors of them, and there's different sizes of them, and they're all that campanulate.
That's right.
Right? And so what we would do is we would take these and these lovely little ovate mushroom cards, which also are varied in size and color.
Same colors.
Mm-hmm. And we would put them all on a rug, all mixed up together. And then our child would be classifying them. So, for example, they might pick this one up. And where are the two cards? Yes, hold those up. So then they would compare them, looking for ovate. Does it look more like that or more like that? And maybe to our eyes, it's pretty easy. We can see that like the cap shape is the same and it's obviously ovate. To a child, it actually might not be that obvious.
Yeah, that's right.
So they might actually really have to study them in order to see. And then we would have them maybe pick another card and compare. And you could just do it just like this with just two, because there's plenty of these cards.
Let's grab that.
You don't have to use all.
Now, these are obvious, and this is where the challenge can get really fun, because in your set, if you make a set or you use our set, some of these get kind of tricky. Like this shape is a lot closer to that shape. Or how about...
sure, the depressed one versus the
depressed
umbonate.
Yeah, look at this. These are different, but they're very similar. And so you would give these to a child depending on, their readiness for challenge or so forth, but don't be afraid to give them tricky shapes. Don't just give them match the square and the star and the triangle.
Right. I think that's where we sometimes go wrong in, in educational materials, is by Maria Montessori was very insistent that we not dumb down things for kids. And in fact, using things from your natural environment, you could actually do this same kind of activity just by, I'm going to give you one of the most brilliant things you could do today without purchasing anything, friends. Okay. Although Mushroom is not in our store yet, right? No. So if you're a member of Constellation, you have access to Mushroom already. And if you want access to Mushroom, join us in Constellation.
True.
But here's something you could do for free right today in your own environment. You could go take a basket or a little Ziploc baggie, and you're going to go to your local park, and you're just going to pick a leaf off of every single, maybe on the ground. I don't know if you want to pick the leaves off the trees or not. If that's something you can do and you feel comfortable with, then do it. I wouldn't recommend doing it in front of the Smithsonian Museum in Washington.
It's a very specific warning.
Or in a botanical garden. Probably not.
I would also suggest learning the difference between poison oak and other things first.
Good tip. So you're going to go into a natural environment, and you're just going to pick leaves, and you can do it off of fresh leaves or the leaves on the ground, whatever you're more comfortable with. Fresh leaves would probably be more interesting because they'll be more consistently green. Spring is if you have leaves out in the spring, hopefully you've got some growing. We've got a lot of evergreen trees here.
And it doesn't have to be a tree. It could be a bush, a flower petal, whatever.
But you're going to pick just several sizes of that thing, so into different stages of growth, or leaves that look more or less the same. And then you're going to do it from several different kinds of trees. So maybe if I were going to do this here in the Bay Area, I might go and I might pick like 5 or 6 little redwood fronds, right? So just little tiny redwood fronds, just the edges of them. And then I might go and I might pick 5 deciduous, not deciduous, or it could be a deciduous tree. It could be like little oak leaves, or something, and then I might pick 5 fronds from the Douglas fir,
manzanitas or whatever.
Manzanitas or whatever. And then we're going to come home, and you're going to mix up all your little leaves. And what you could do if you wanted to make it like this activity is you don't have to worry about the name of it. All right. So just don't worry about what the name of the leaf is. If you don't want to, you can, if you know the names, but you don't even have to know the names of these trees or of these plants. You can draw or trace the outline of it, which is pretty easy to do with a leaf. Just get a little pen and just trace around one of the leaves, and then you have an outline of your leaf, as many as the different types. And then that is your activity, and your child can spread all of those little bits of nature out on the rug and then categorize them by the shape. And that's something that you could literally do today that would be an excellent and probably somewhat, it could be easy or it could be difficult. I mean, it depends on how you want to make it, right?
Yeah, it's your choice to, are you going to pick leaves from different trees, but they are similarly shaped.
Different size. You could vary
Or
it by size, or you could go with all the same size. You could.
how many are you going to include in the set?
Yeah.
The set that our paper set here
What do we have?
has
6
or 8. There's like dozens of different shapes and colors, but we wouldn't have you put all of them out at the same time, right?
Or at least not initially.
At least initially,
Yeah.
right? Like you're going to
I
work
think
into
with an older child, if you've got like this is designed for ages 2 to 9. So if you've got like an 8-year-old who's pretty good at puzzles, like they might enjoy spreading all
and
of
it's
them
for
out
them.
on
It's
the
less
floor.
about the visual discrimination for the pre-reading, and it's more about the botany, and which is kind of how a thematic approach works.
Well, maybe. I mean,
there's also a puzzle quality.
I still think that the visual discrimination is good for children who are already readers, or
yeah, for sure. Well, I not to digress too much, but yeah, that is when you look at the life science curriculum in lower L, a lot of it is about being able to parse down to a very fine degree what makes one kind of critter different from another,
or different types of roots.
So it gets that visual discrimination skill continues on.
Yes.
So you're right. No, this is a great one. And
I think it's intimidating for parents because we don't necessarily know all these terms. Like I didn't know that mushrooms were classified by their caps.
Yeah, this one's called an umbilicate. Did you know that?
Umbilicate. That I don't know. I did not know that, or would have ever thought about it. But also, so you don't have to know all of these terms in order to make a great activity for your child that is visually discriminating.
I mean, to Alina's comment, the fact is that we'd say, education is a journey you take with your children. And that's because, when you're learning this stuff, there are things for any age that can be interesting to discover. Like I don't know, for whatever reason, I had never thought about like defining the shape of the cap of a mushroom. They must have different names, and indeed they do. And that makes total sense because botanists and scientists come up with all kinds of very specific terms for all kinds of things, for everything. Basically, they name everything. And in order to distinguish them. So of course it's logical, but it just never occurred to me. Well, that's a learning experience for me as an adult. It's going to be different for what the child's going to get out of it, but you're together in that journey. It can be fascinating to do it.
And honestly, like there is nothing like it is boring, friends, to just sit around at home and just watch a kid play with toys all day. Like I think it would take a very special person to find continual interest. But those of us who are active and love learning things, like don't dumb it down for yourself. Take challenges for yourself and actually look at some of the things that we're teaching our children as opportunities for your own expansion of knowledge. There is vast opportunity here for you to to try and memorize these terms yourself.
Totally.
And then maybe go out into your natural environment and you try to identify mushrooms by their cap shape.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
And that makes learning with children and homeschooling children more fun because you are more engaged, and honestly it is better for them.
You're modeling this
I mean, let's compare the modeling of you just sitting on the floor zoning out on your phone while your child is doing some activity versus you getting a book and reading about something that maybe your child will learn about in detail and maybe they won't, but they're seeing you engaged and they're seeing you excited and they're seeing you challenge yourself.
Yeah.
This is a period where you could get a book about botany
and
you could study the names of plants that are in your local area and try to identify them and challenge yourself. And if maybe botany is easy and something that you already know a lot about, pick geometry. There's lots to be learned about shapes or, mathematical concepts. I mean, there's just the whole world is so big and there's so much to learn. And visual discrimination isn't just for shape sorters and itty bitty toddlers. It's for all of us. All right.
And so I know we're kind of, to put a bow on it for me, I would say to go back to what we started with, which is that a child is learning more than we often expect because we don't always see the outcome. We want to measure it or we want to quantify it financially or some other way. And so a child reading and regurgitating reading is very measurable and identifiable, whereas these pre-reading activities tend to be harder to see, or we just don't value them in our society. And that does not mean that they aren't important. So go have fun, enjoy the joy of learning. Your child is absorbing that all in, and you will be doing a great job of setting them up for success.
Yes. All right. We'll end with these last comments from our friends. Alina recommends you could just go buy a bunch of mushrooms and cook them and taste the differences.
That's a great
That
idea.
is so good for us. I mean, it's not just our children that are experiencing the sensory, the senses of their world. We also could try to discriminate with our sense of taste.
Sure,
That would be
totally.
a great extension. And Nikki says, yesterday, my son and I read a book about the differences between alligators and crocodiles. A great
Excellent.
example
Yes.
of something that maybe not all of us know all of the details about, but that's a great visual discrimination activity.
And kids are often really fascinated by the level of detail in that kind of.
And then from whatever zoo or museum you go to that happens to have pictures of crocodiles or alligators or real life,
they have a real one.
Alligators or crocodiles, you and your child together are going to be like, what do you think the snout is? How is the snout shaped?
Ears or whatever.
How big is it?
Yeah, exactly.
I know.
So
cool.
Go have fun.
All right. Do have fun with your kids, and we'll see you next week, friends.
Bye.